Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second installment of They Came From Below. I am your host, Tom, the very lowest of men, and tonight I'm going to be talking through some more tips about how you can get the most out of Genestealer cults in Arks of Omen. Today's episode, I'm going to be focused entirely on scoring. I'm sure you will have heard by now that Genestealer cults score very well. We're capable of putting out big numbers and achieving big results, but you as a player still need to be responsible for doing the details and the fine work to make sure that this happens, right? So what we're going to look at today is a few of the ways that you can improve your scoring whilst playing GSC in Arks of Omen. The structure is going to be as followed. I'm going to think about scoring primary as Genestealer cults and some of the things you need to bear in mind, probably one of our more challenging areas. Then I'm going to look at each of the sort of areas of secondaries we excel in one at a time. So I'm going to look at Broodswarm. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to think about ambush, and I'm going to consider some of the options that you have with action secondaries as well. The focus with this is going to be the little things you can do to make sure you tighten up your scoring game, stay consistent across a game, and achieve bigger results. So, playing the primary as Genestealer cults. This is definitely our most vulnerable area. We are fragile. Although we have lots of bodies on the board, it's not always easy to hold ground, and we have to work hard to make sure we keep scoring primary across a game, often in the face of very aggressive enemy shooting or combat. So there's a few tricks you can do to ensure that you play the primary well as Genestealer cults. Make sure you utilize cover and exploit the regrowth of regenerated neophytes via icons or the icon ward. The same goes for Atalan Jackals, which the icon ward can also resurrect. What I mean by this is having units just poking out, tiptoeing onto objectives, so that if the opponent shoots you, they kill some chunk of the squad, which you're then able to regrow via the icon or the icon ward to retake the objective in your command phase. This means that you don't lose entire squads to enemy shooting, helps to mitigate the damage that ranged armies can put out, and it can sometimes trick the opponent into giving away a hold 2 or a hold more that they weren't anticipating you were going to have. The setup for this requires practice and different maps and terrain sets create different opportunities for this, but you should always be looking for places that you can just sort of tiptoe out onto and have a little narrow foothold that you're then able to protect against shooting by regrowing and regenerating. You can also protect your vulnerable objectives with shenanigans, right? Some of these obvious ones utilize stratagems or jank from the book itself. The big one is lurk in the shadows, so essentially a sort of screening mechanic stratagem whereby the unit behind another one, an infantry unit, can't be shot unless it's the closest eligible thing or within 12. You can pop this stratagem at key moments to ensure that a unit on an objective stays alive. The opponent has to use all of their shooting to chew through whatever's in front of it. And that then makes it easier to protect it via regrowth and other stratagems as well. You can use the Sanctus. This is one of my favorites at the moment. The Sanctus can't be shot unless you're within 12. So the Sanctus is very nice for just popping out on an objective on the far side, far away from enemy forces, and using it to lock down an objective in the face of enemy guns. Either they have to commit lots of points to going and getting rid of them, which then leaves them vulnerable to counterattack by you, or the Sanctus just stands there cheekily holding it indefinitely, which is also great fun. It's worth remembering that the OBSEC you put on objectives is fragile and will get taken down by aggressive plays from enemy melee. So it's important to have your Jackals doing a screening role, protecting the objectives in case enemy offense gets near you, or better still, projecting threat onto enemy objectives, which means that they in turn are unable to threaten yours. As well as scoring your own primary, it's very important to shut down the opponents, right? This isn't an area we're necessarily going to dominate in during the game. So you have to make sure that you get a small edge on the opponent's primary by shutting down theirs. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can shoot the opponent completely off objectives using neophyte bombs or jackals, or you can use charges with your OBSEC from ambush to shut down their scoring. This is something people often forget to do with neophytes, right? People tend to use neophytes as a shooting or aggressive tool, but it's easy to forget that there's 20 OBSEC bodies there. And so if you come in 8 away rather than 6, you can potentially tee up a charge to tie up the opponent and secure an objective as well. Use that combination of tricks and you should begin to score nicely on the primary across a game. So, scoring Broodswarm. This is a very powerful strategy, and it's a big part of our game now. It's a secondary that offers us a lot of points, and scoring Broodswarm consistently across a game should always be part of your plan, right? To score this, we get points for having more models on the board. more models in our deployment zone, more models in no man's land, more models in the enemy's deployment zone, and 1 bonus point if you get all of these. So potentially 5 points in a turn on offer, but often less than that. So how can you as a GSC player make sure that you maximize Broodswarm? Well, you want to have a high body count in your list. I'm afraid this is why we're playing as a big infantry horde and biker horde at the moment, is you want to outnumber the opponent on the board, because that is going to mean that you're ticking away on Broodswarm passively. You can usually lock down your own deployment, and it should be relatively easy to lock down no man's land with the numbers of bodies that we can bring to bear. If you just do this and score 3 for 5 turns, that's still a 15. So you don't need to be aggressive to do well scoring Broodswarm. You can indeed play quite passively. If the opportunity for a decisive strike presents, go for it. Chuck some stuff down, take the opponent out. But it's very possible to play more cagely and more defensively and still be scoring well on Broodswarm, especially in the early stages of a game. Late game, if you're looking to rack up and get that 5-pointer to sort of top up any losses earlier on, you can drop units into the enemy deployment zone via return to shadows in the late game, where they'll often have less units left back in their own deployment, and that might well be able to get you a 5 late on if you're chasing the total score. Return to shadows on acolytes is just such a useful thing to be able to pop, or a damaged neophyte unit that you need to then go and get into a different position, and it can often line up well with trying to steal an opponent's objective in the final throws of the game as well. You do all these things, I think Broodswarm should very easily be a 15 in close games. You may struggle to score it if you get absolutely blown away or bodied off the table, but generally it's a very reliable scorer as long as you keep an eye on the numbers and make sure you're keeping bodies in the places that they need to be. Ambush. Now, this is also a very jammy secondary these days. It got boosted so that now essentially you will get 2 points if you kill something with a crossfire token attached to it. 2 points if you kill something that's exposed, i.e. we're shooting from either side of it with crossfire units. And 2 points if you kill something that's either come from ambush or from underground in that turn. And that means coming from a blip or dropping up via the Genestealer deployment shenanigans. So I think the key to scoring this across the game is to try to be shooting consistently for 4s in turns that it makes sense to do so. If you go first, you can use They Came From Below on some pure strain Genestealers, go and eat something, return to shadows, run away, keep your 4 points because you've put a crossfire token on it with the Nexus, and that's a really nice way to start the game if you go first and you don't want to be too aggressive. You just pick on something, kill it off, get a bunch of points. Then as you stagger your waves of arrivals from Deep Strike, the important thing here is to be remembering to tee up crossfire or exposed before every kill if possible. That's where your supporting characters come in, right? The Nexus can put a crossfire token on something before you start to shoot. Little characters like the Kellamorph or the Reductus Saboteur or the Sanctus can throw a little bit of multi-damage on something. It's worth saying for the Reductus Saboteur, you do need to give her Oppressor's Bane to actually get the crossfire keyword on her, but that's easy enough to do. Using those characters in support of Neophyte blobs is great because they can chuck a bit of damage, get a token on it, and then the Neophyte blob can take it out to get you 4 on ambush. And trying to look for those angles across the board is really important, right? You'll often have other units dropping down elsewhere in the game to do action secondaries, for example. So 5-mans of acolytes dropping down to do RBD. And you can often coincide this so that across the board, you've got a Neophyte blob coming in to get that lovely crossfire and exposed link and get the full shebang on ambush. It's very easy to score as long as you plan your turns and your positioning very carefully. If you're chasing points and scrapping for points on ambush, it's worth remembering to finish off enemy targets with stuff that's come out of reserves. But it's also important to note that you can be patient here, right? You only need to go big on this in a few turns in the game. Atalan Jackals are also surprisingly useful for teeing this up in defensive areas of your own deployment. You can often have them use their speed to snake round and make sure that stuff that's shooting from your deployment zone is technically getting exposed as you confirm your kills. It's one that you have to be constantly thinking about. It's worth having a little checklist in your shooting phase to make sure that you get this done, but it's one that I think you can now score very high on as long as you do it due diligence. Finally, scoring action secondaries. This tends to be the most logical third suite of actions for us in Arks of Omen. Psychic secondaries aren't quite as good as they were, so I wouldn't recommend them, and I think action secondaries are the way forward. So I think the key thing for this is that 5-man acolyte packs are your friend, right? Don't leave home without 2, maybe 3 5-man acolyte squads. You can use them to drop down and score RBD, or in another game, they can drop down in the second turn to start putting banners up in the no man's land if it's dangerous to do that in the early game. And in general, they're very flexible. You want to keep them safe. Ideally, the same unit can do multiple jobs if you protect it, right? So if you have an Acolyte pack in your home field that then does an RBD, you can then use Return to Shadows, send it off somewhere else, drop it down, and do another job later on. It's very nice if you can get Acolyte packs doing multiple actions across a game. The more dangerous board quarters, chances are they might just have to go out and die, right? But if you can use them again, it's well worth protecting them. The Clamorous is actually a very useful character for this as well, as that it can hand out action and shoot to different units. So you can have neophyte blobs dropping down, doing shooting, and also putting banners up or RBD. But in general, I like to use those to charge and get involved offensively as well. So you don't necessarily want to do that. For banners, more passive secondary characters can assist, right? You can use the Sanctus or your other sort of supporting characters to put banners up in the early game, and that can often work well with using the Sanctus as a sort of long distance sort of objective holder in the face of enemy shooting. In some defensive games, banners can be quite nice because it draws the opponent out, forces them to come to you to try and take your banners down, which creates opportunities for you to kill units in order to get exposed and crossfire and all the other scoring you want for ambush, right? So it's quite good against elves, I find, particularly as a way of drawing them out of their little holes, making them come and be in places that they don't want to be. That said, I think retrieve battlefield data is still our great strength, right? It's so hard to stop Genestealer Cults scoring a 12 on this. And in pursuit of it, I think you need to always be looking to make sure that any super screening options your opponent has, infiltrators, for example, are removed and dealt with early on in the game to sort of gradually wear down their ability to stop you sneaking in places. If you do that, you should be able to score extremely high on this. Thank you very much for listening. It's been very fun to come back and do part 2. In the next one, I think I'm going to talk about some of our key units at this moment in time and look a little at the kinds of GSC units you might want to bring in your lists. If you like this content, there's lots more on YouTube at youtube.com/6++gaming, where you can find covering all sorts of factions and lots of regular shows and podcasts as well. Thank you very much for listening. See you all again next time.